Well, thank you for having me at this panel discussion. I'll be talking about actually the three stakeholders that one has to think of when working on digitalization, workforce planning from our perspective. So obviously, first of all, there's the employer. Second of all, there's the planner. And then we also have the employee. Now, let's look at their challenges and their goals. Now, volatile demands and significant idle costs have made profitable operations a challenge and have made it more complex, and also have made operations, especially in the logistics industry, a less attractive workplace. Now, in that war for talent, digitalizing workforce planning and investing into corporational tools for your employees, from our perspective, is the only way to go. And this talent shortfall that we are seeing is going to be the number one problem in the future. So investing into technology that makes the workplace a better place for the employee is worthwhile considering, if not necessary, for every employer. So let's look at their goals. First of all, obviously, they want to improve efficiency of their workforce. Second of all, they need to increase automation in order to achieve that. And they want to work on their flexibility. So in a lot of cases that we see, employers are locked up with having to publish shift plans, for example, way ahead of the day of operation, so 3-4 months out, and being able to change a shift is very costly, if at all possible. Now, that obviously doesn't work with today's volatility in demand. So that's one thing we often see that needs to be changed. And that's the goal of the employer. Third, reduce the dependency on knowledge islands. When you look at a planning team, oftentimes there's like one person that knows how to operate an Excel, or knows how to configure rules in the roster, or shift planning solution. So that's usually a goal. Employers have to make sure that more than one person indeed is able to work with the system and is able to publish a shift. Fourth goal usually is achieve transparency through reliable data. So get more into understanding data, get access to data faster, work more analytical, and also work with that data, learn from that data. So this is also something that we see highly valuable in our tool for our clients. And last but not least, obviously, they're also looking at improving the happiness of their employees, and implementing a solution that helps both sides in the end is the ultimate goal. Now, we've seen a lot of employers, so clients of ours, already having started to track their employees with solutions. There's a lot of global organizations across industry that are already investing into such technologies, and I think there is a lot more to come. Now, when they are targeting this challenge of implementing technology in workforce planning, obviously, evident challenge is they're looking at complex, historically grown legacy system landscape that is to be replaced, or at least partially to be replaced. So that's certainly one of the biggest challenges. There's unions that are often, unfortunately, shielding employees and preventing major improvements, blocking innovation. I've also seen it otherwise. So in other cases, that unions have been very cooperative. So I'm going to be talking about how to tackle that challenge in a little bit. Last but not least, obviously, in the EU, data protection laws are one of the challenges of employers when implementing workforce planning as well. And that's also something to consider to comply. At the same time, though, a lot of the organizations that have already invested into technology in workforce planning have observed significant increase in their productivity and also increase in satisfaction of their employees. Let's talk about the planner. So the planner is confronted, and the planner, first of all, is usually equipped with as little as Excel, or, as I said, a legacy system to save operation. Now, I don't need to tell you how they come along with that, and how hurdlesome that and frustrating that is. And let's say it's not a solution, right? So at the same time, the employer wants the planner to deliver fast information, make decisions, replan, according to new operational demands. So that's those are just the challenges of the planner. Planners are increasingly confronted with challenges and questions that can hardly be answered or worked on with Excel or the current solutions that they are using, because they're just not as flexible. They're often stuck with the same and at the same time also used to processes and suboptimal processes, unsafe processes that have been designed around legacy system solutions that are hurdlesome, time consuming, yet they are established. And so that's what you've been doing for 20 years. And the third point would be, usually there's currently, especially after the pandemic, with a lot of colleagues having left the organization, there is little to no time for conceptual work. There's just no capacity to think about what could be a good to-be process, how could we properly set up a new process and execute a system selection so everybody buys into this, and execute implementation, take time for testing. There's just no time, right? So looking at the new position of planners, or let's say the new role description, I would say the new role of a planner with new technology, and that's one of the challenges as well. Once technology is implemented, it causes less manual planning activity, resulting in the requirement or also having the requirement that less business knowledge is needed, but more IT skill sets are needed, more analytical approaches are needed, ability to think analytically, work with data, look at KPIs, understand them, configure an optimization tool. So these are the skills that are required tomorrow. So that's obviously a challenge for planners. At the same time, they cannot rely on historic data and historic knowledge because it can't be utilized for forecasting anymore. So it's obviously increasingly complex to forecast, and it's requiring more automation to do that. Plus, having to understand, as I said, and utilize data to improve the quality of planning, to improve reporting, and to understand how things can be improved is going to be core of the new planner role, so to say. Last but not least, attrition, as I said, has led to fragmented knowledge within those planning teams on the business side. So that has not made it easier to look at automation or look at digitalizing workforce planning. Last but not least, we've got the employee. Long thought to be a person that just gets the shift plan, is happy with that shift plan. But actually today's employees, tomorrow's employees want impact. They want transparency, they want flexibility, they want to optimize their private life. They want to be able to, talk to, cooperate with their colleagues. They want to use applications to plan their shifts. So they have changed significantly. One of the biggest fears, though, when looking at digitalization is still that a change will result in worsening of their personal situation. Not even worse, replace them. They will look at, we see a lot of skepticism towards technology that is being implemented without understanding, or because technology has been implemented before without delivering benefits. So there's a certain frustration oftentimes when, past IT implementation projects haven't resulted in what was expected, or they had overpromised. So that's usually something that we observe a lot. And workforce is increasingly at the same time heterogeneous. They're not, as in the past, one big group of employees all wanting the same, but they are looking, they have some employees, you have some employees looking at work-life balance, some are looking for high hours, a career path, high pay. And you need to make sure that in those projects, when looking at digitalization, you make sure none of them is misrepresented. So you need to make sure you've got them all on board. So how do we actually solve all those problems? So what are the solutions? Now, looking at the employer, there we see that that employers need to think of, looking at more disruptional ways of executing such projects. So first of all, they need to think of the approach as in, potentially going fit to standard instead of customizing a solution right around their requirements. They need to invest into change. They need to start communicating, integrate people that are going to be affected, such as employees and planners, into the IT project. Understand the staff personas, understand the needs of the staff that is going to be using and going to be affected. And by the system, rethink parameters towards more sustainable decisions. Think about whether you want to take a vendor that has higher business understanding. Also, not only think about fit to standard, but also best of breed. Like, does it have to be a suite? Should we not go for a more individual, flexible but pragmatic startup? That does things a little different than the established ones. So these are the recommendations that I would have for employers. Looking at the planner, obviously planners are to be enabled, but also from their personal attitude need to increase acceptance and openness for new technology, processes, and solutions. So that must rise. There needs to be sufficient capacity that needs to be allocated to these people that are contributing to the project, or capacity for certain activities needs to be allocated to the vendor. So maybe the vendor can, document requirements in workshop instead of the planners having to do that. So the planners can actually focus on the most critical elements of such an IT project. Last but not least, the employees also here, through communication, active and transparent and honest communication by the client or the employer, employees need to be able to increase their acceptance and openness for new technology as well. One needs to think about intensifying the proper representation in those initiatives for digitalization. So not only one person from staff, but also, mind makers are to be included, or other, just people representing the different areas or the different groups within the workforce. Make sure you resolve roadblocks and enable that change. So anything that's currently hindering people to think open and to work on new technology and requirements and new processes, make sure these roadblocks that exist are being worked on before you start an IT project. What are the benefits and what can be achieved from our perspective? Obviously, reduce costs, number one reason why you want to go for it, and also what pays into your ROI. Obviously, efficiency, increase productivity, increase planning quality and planning productivity as well. We see a lot of clients achieving employee happiness increase, and through that also not only higher motivation, but also higher productivity and shift. In the end, these employees that are now happier, more satisfied with their workplace are also, your best advocates for, attracting new talent. So you may as well make them happy. Last but not least, data security. So we all know that, if there's no solution, employees are, exchanging their shifts on WhatsApp, which is nothing you want to be happening in your solution. So these are the benefits that our clients usually achieve by having implemented or digitalized workforce planning. So how do we go about it? I think it's safe to say that one of the mantras that we have at WePlan when we target IT projects and implementation projects is walk before you run. Everybody talks about fancy AI technology and whatever else, coming from the stone, or usually clients coming from the stone age of workforce planning using Excel or really, really old software should not be talking about AI tomorrow, because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of training also of the software to make sure things work the way you are anticipating it to work. So let's say, first step on our side, from our perspective, fix the basics, eliminate the chaos, clean your processes, think about standardizing your processes to industry standard, looking at how things are done outside of your bubble, overcome data modeling limits and increase your flexibility. So look at your planning rules, see how you can become more flexible there. Discuss with your unions how flexible they are, because they're also, looking at improving their employees' life. And after you finish that and cleaned that area, then look at improving quality of work. So understand how data has changed, improve collaboration between the teams, streamline data collection, clean the data, make sure you're not interpreting on data that you don't know or don't understand or don't truly know whether the quality is high. This collaboration piece usually feeds into, also overcoming planning silos and the dependence on individual knowledge islands, we always call them. So that's individuals that have all the knowledge. So make sure you're using your IT implementation projects also to share knowledge about the process with more than one person and about the system. In that second step, also, you can start to include, or we usually start to include the workforce in the process by letting them, influence what they would like to do, letting them not only influence what they would like to see from the IT project, but also how they want to see the process tomorrow. And then the third step is kind of like advancing not only your planning quality, which you've solved in 1 and 2, but also going to really fancy new agile, flexible technology of agile processes that are going to be maybe more complex, but fully automated. So in our case, that'd be looking at what if scenarios, at automated push of data from the ops area, fully automated planning and bidding, for example, and being able to ensure continuous planning improvement by automizing the analytics of the data and pushing it into the forecasting area, which is obviously what we do and what makes then causes then a significant step in improvement in the planning process of our clients. So that would be just real quick, our learnings from within digitalizing workforce. I hope this helps and looking forward to seeing you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matt, and today we're going to be going over technical debt. So you're probably wondering why I have a picture of a horse, a gas vehicle, and an electric vehicle all on screen. Well, technical debt is very similar to the 3 things we see here and how we get to them. So a horse was the way we moved before. It was our method of transportation in the old world. And horses brought a lot of issues. They pooped everywhere, there's manure all over the street, and there were a lot of businesses that had to work kind of tangentially to try and solve the problem of manure on the street. And they were forecasting outwards that, hey, if we had more people, more population, we'd need more horses. And with more horses, we'd have more manure. We need to figure out what to do with all this manure. And when cars were innovated, it turned out that manure was no longer a problem. So all those forecasts they did were not needed because now the new vehicle was able to completely replace that. And yes, it came with its own set of problems, but it completely alleviated the issue with horses. Now, with gas-powered vehicles, we face the issue of oil shortages, oil increasing, and environmental damage. So that's where something like the electric vehicle comes into play. Why did we choose the Tesla here? Because Tesla was in a unique position to actually build from the ground up to make sure that the car was meant to have an electric battery. And that's why they do so well. It was built from the ground up with the idea of an electric battery in mind, as opposed to all the complex components of the vehicle. Now, how does that relate to technical debt? We'll see that throughout this presentation. A few risks of outdated technology here. So we have the creation of new problems. We also have never-ending maintenance, like we saw with the horse and the gas-powered vehicle and the electric-powered vehicle. Each new innovation comes with its own new set of challenges, but holding on to old methods of doing things and having to deal with old problems that still persist. Now you don't have anyone having issues with manure on the street because horses aren't here. But if you had a group of individuals who are still holding on to their horses, you would still have an issue with the manure. But people move on, and if you don't, you fall behind. So creation of new problems with outdated technology, never-ending maintenance. You'll always have to maintain it because older innovations don't always think of future-proofing their solutions, and never-ending maintenance comes with increased costs, increased delivery times, and hard to find specialists, especially when it comes to software. Scalability concerns. When you use older technology, it was never meant to extend or be modular. That was never what was in mind, especially when it comes to software. It was built in a monolithic way, siloed, and it was meant to be strong and resistant in one piece. But as we move and progress with technological innovations, it's all about being best in breed and being able to interact and work with other solutions. So almost a good metric of a good solution is to see how well can it integrate with other solutions. Poor extensibility. It's kind of hand in hand with scalability concerns, but if you can't extend the functionality of your system, you're doomed to have to always implement it yourself, work with the existing provider for them to build it custom. Or if you are trying to build connectors with new systems, it's always in some kind of suboptimal way. And you know in the back of your mind that over the next few years, you're going to have to build more. And it's always kind of something that's weighing on you. You know that you have technical debt and that it has to be addressed at some point. And we just keep moving it to the next day, mañana, tomorrow, until the day finally hits and going, oh man, we have to deal with this. Increased cost. Costs increase as new innovations move forward and you're maintaining an old one. Why? Because new talent, new developers will all move towards a newer innovation. There are more opportunities, it's generally more scalable, and you could just do more things with it. So as the workforce transitions to a newer type of work, then your old legacy system becomes more and more costly to maintain. Whether it be internally in-house or with third party, costs will always increase if you're maintaining older tech. And it's less extensible, it's less scalable. All in all, you want to keep moving with innovations and stay on top of tech. Talent scarcity, we just spoke about it, but it gets harder and harder to find people who can maintain legacy solutions and can take full advantage of new technology. If you want to use things like beacons, if you want to use things like blockchain, old technology doesn't even begin to allow for this. So if you have a new innovative solution and you're looking to continuously implement new solutions, you can always take full advantage of new innovations because there's scalability in mind, there's extensibility in mind. So in workforce management, let's look at a few criteria here of what makes workforce management solutions important here. What should you be looking for in a workforce management provider? These are things that are a bit less obvious. It's not so much client facing, but this is even more important than some of the functionality that already exists on the front end, because you can always build functionality on the front end, especially on new systems. It's easy, it's quick, but the actual architecture is far more important because that's where technical debt comes from or stems from. So cloud-based technologies with agnostic deployment to stay future-proof. A modern workforce management solution, or really any modern enterprise solution, should have agnostic deployment. You should be able to deploy it on private infrastructure, on public cloud, on private cloud, or on hybrid cloud. In any type of environment, you should be able to deploy that solution. Why is that important? Because if ever you'd like to switch your infrastructure as an organization, if you want to switch your infrastructure, you want to migrate, maybe you have certain needs, you can rest assured that your solution that you've selected can go and migrate there. You won't have in the back of your mind, oh, but we can't really do that because we can't transition all of our tools. In this case, you have flexibility. You can rest easy knowing you don't have technical debt at the architectural level or at the deployment level. Easily integratable to fully documented endpoints. Here we're going back to extensibility and modularity. If the system has configurable endpoints or endpoints that you can easily use, it's incredibly powerful because you can work with new innovations, you can export or import from any third-party system, and this opens up the valve to allow for best of breed solutions where you take the best solutions of each class and interconnect them for an almighty solution. How do you validate that a provider has fully integrated or fully documented endpoints? Easy, you just ask them for their API documentation, and this is easy to do. You ask them for their API documentation and they either provide it or they don't. And if they provide it, you could see if it's very well documented and how many items they have, or if it's just one or two items and in the back of your mind, you know that it's not easily extensible. It's going to cost you money to develop. It'll take a lot of time. And if they don't have it, it's a big red flag. It's not built in a proper way. So fully documented APIs, ask for them, validate that you have a lot of data. And if that's the case, a lot of connectors, you're good to go. A system that's been pen tested with proof through a report. Any good enterprise solution should be going through independent audits or pen testing, where a third-party company will come in, attempt to break the system, break into it, steal some information, damage it, and they come back with a full report. And if you can now show that report to a client, a provider, in your case, you guys should be asking for a report. It helps a lot with credibility. Now you can rest assured that this isn't just some sales guy trying to pitch you on something or sell you on something. You actually have a report that shows that the system is safe and that data is secure. Now, lastly, a provider that's continuously pushing the boundaries of innovation. The last thing you want from a modern provider is someone who's stagnating, someone who's not looking to always push the boundaries, because you know if they're stagnating in their current state, you can rest assured that if you're looking to have them for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, they're probably not going to change much. And you're not going to really be able to take full advantage of that. And you're paying licenses for something that's on its way to being deprecated. Or end of life. In this case, if you're picking a solution that's continuously innovating, continuously pushing the boundaries, you know that over the years of you using it, you'll be able to take advantage of optimizations, new connections, new innovations. That's what makes a great provider. So something that's agnostic for deployment, easily integratable through fully documented APIs, good pen testing reports that are done by an independent firm, and lastly, an organization that's pushing the boundaries. And ask them, what is it that you're doing to push the boundaries of your space? For us, what are we doing to push the boundaries of workforce management? I like to answer that question. So let's take a look at some of the things we do. When it comes to time and attendance, WorkAxle does a lot of really cool things with time and attendance and task management. We make use of beacons for micro-location and for micro-location tracking, automatic time tracking based off where you are geographically, whether on a macro scale or on a micro scale, and you don't need actual punching in. So it's more sanitary, more cost effective. And we are the first providers and the only providers at the moment to integrate beacons into our solution. We also do AI-based demand forecasting and schedule optimization. So AI-based demand forecasting, what we could do here is based off certain variables that an organization would give us, we can actually take a bespoke approach to creating labor forecasts or what it is we would need for specific days. We also partner with WePlan for anything in the airline space or in baggage handling to do any sort of forecasting, since they have that domain expertise. But this is a big thing now, and as the workforce is diminishing, it becomes even less about forecasting and more about optimizing the existing workforce to make sure that you're making the best use of your existing workforce. We're obviously in the middle of the Great Resignation, or people like to call it that, but we just have fewer people working, and you have to make the best use of the people you do have. And lastly, tokenized rewards and recognition. We're taking a unique approach to rewards and recognition in the platform because as there are fewer and fewer people in the workforce, you want to make sure that you're incentivizing them and that they feel engaged and rewarded for doing well. It's another layer of incentives to make sure that people aren't leaving for something more interesting. We do all of this on blockchain. And a typical question we get is, well, why blockchain? Like, why are you just using it as a buzzword? And the answer is no. When we made this module, there were two big constraints to blockchain, or when we were thinking of making this, there were two major constraints that prevented us from using it. There was settlement times and cost of transaction. Cost of transaction was high and it wasn't a feasible implementation, and settlement times could take up to 7 minutes to half an hour. It wasn't feasible until we found a great network that allowed us to do transactions feelessly and instantaneously. And we decided to build our rewards and recognition platform on that. And why would we use blockchain over a traditional database? Well, let's think of what the purpose of a database is. And actually, let's go back a step and think, what was the purpose of keeping notes or a ledger on a piece of paper? Back in the day, you'd keep notes of what happened on a ledger, on a piece of paper, and everything was on paper. Then when databases came, we all migrated to databases, and people were asking, why would we use databases? And the answer was that you could store a lot of information, you can retrieve information more easily, it was indexed. It just made more sense to use a database. Why would you want stacks of paper that are really hard to index or search through. It didn't make sense. And plus, when it's in a database, now you have extensibility, you have scalability, all the things we kind of saw with older solutions that accrue technical debt. So databases helped with all that. But the one issue with a database that's similar to a piece of paper is you could lose that piece of paper. Someone could erase it or modify an entry. On a database, that problem still exists. You can have people modify information. A system admin could change it, delete it, update it. They could do anything they want. It's not immutable. And a database serves as a record of transactions. Ledgers on a piece of paper served as a record of transactions. Blockchain ensures immutability and redundancy, so that if ever there's a hack or there's a compromise in a database, you don't lose all that information. Instead, on blockchain, you have redundant copies to the point where that you can never lose that information, and you know that it's immutable. So for auditing purposes, you know that it's completely safe and that nothing has ever changed. And if you want to index information on the blockchain, it's even more efficient than a traditional database. So a lot of really important use case for blockchain, and this is the beginning. We're going to start seeing more and more transition to blockchain from traditional databases, no different than how we saw a bunch of transitions happening from pen and paper to database. And much like with the horse, and the gas vehicle, you don't really see anyone now with a horse on the street. You either see gas vehicles or electric. And I think in the next 10, 20, 30 years, we would be surprised to see gas vehicles on the road, because soon everything will be electric, at least in the next few decades. Same thing here. Pen and paper was good, but then we all moved to databases. And now if you see an organization on pen and paper, you're going, oh man, they're really behind, And now if you're not going onto blockchain, people are going to be looking at people on databases in the next few years and go, well, they're really behind if they're not on chain. Anyways, we make very good use of it here. And this is a really interesting use case where we solve both the transaction settlement time problems and the transaction cost problem. Really interesting solution. Would love to present this to you guys later, but one of our more fun innovations. So some options to move forward here. If you're looking to move forward with a provider, well, you have two ways to move off of your old system and implement a new one. There's rip and replace, and this is a huge undertaking. The pros are that you get a fresh new system by the end of the implementation. But in reality, I think we've all been through a large implementation, or you can imagine it, that the cons are that it's extremely costly. It takes a lot of time, like an immense amount of time. Burdensome on internal team. Your processes are always changing. And of course, lots of new processes and edge cases. You're completely uprooting a system. You're asking everyone to change how they do work. This isn't really good in practice. Although, yes, you get a fresh new system by the end of it, the actual implementation of it is oftentimes, disastrous. So the best of breed solution approach is much better, because now you're rip and replacing over time, but much smaller chunks, much more isolated chunks, and in a non-invasive way. So the pros are that it's less invasive. It's more calculated, and changes are done step by step. So you're not replacing everything, just single process, single team, validate it. Is it good? Yes. Nice. Let's move on to the next one. There's better functionality for business specific processes. So generally best in breed solutions have far better functionality for what it is they're meant to do, as opposed to just a monolithic solution that does a bit of everything. Best in breed solutions really excel at the thing they're supposed to do. And if you do this over time, you'll eventually replace your existing system or your old legacy system to be a bunch of best in breed solutions that are all extensible and scalable between each other, because hopefully they're well documented, like we saw in the earlier slide. The cons, though, is that you still have to work with the legacy system in parallel to the new system. I actually don't necessarily see this as a con. Some people may, but I think it's actually good that you do a slow transition, because we're creatures of habit, whether we like it or not. And being able to slowly transition is so much easier to do and so much easier to implement. Much like with horses and cars, we didn't just immediately from one day to the next stop all horses, introduce new cars. In any kind of new innovation transition, it's always slow and done in parallel with an existing solution. And as you're doing these changes, you're now able to witness what the new innovation can do and what the old system is doing. And when they exist in parallel, it becomes almost obvious that you'd want to be using the new solution. So everything naturally gravitates to the better innovation. And that's it for today. I hope you guys really liked it. We've loved covering some of the innovations we do at WorkAxle. And hopefully this gave some good insights onto kind of the big problems that technical debt can bring, some of that heavy weight you feel on your shoulders sometimes going, oh, I don't know if our systems can really extend, and some of the ways to move forward on how to implement new solutions and certain criteria when evaluating new providers. Anyways, thank you very much, and really appreciate WePlan inviting us here today. And have a great day, guys. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Claire Taitte. I'm coming to you here from Dallas, Texas in the US. I'm going to share a little bit about what I experienced during 20 years of planning and scheduling Southwest Airlines crews. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Southwest is one of the largest carriers here in the US. I started in the year 2000 in crew scheduling. So for those who aren't in the industry, crew scheduling is the department that fixes schedules when they break. So if a flight is canceled or if a crew is delayed, crew scheduling will make changes to their schedules in order to make sure every flight has a legal pilot and flight attendant on it. They also are responsible to cover open flying and find someone to work a flight if a crew is not able to work it due to an absence or a sick call or something like that. I spent 7 years in crew scheduling, and then I went to crew planning. So crew planning are the builders and architects of the schedule. They take the flight schedule and make it into crew schedules and make sure that all of that is assigned ahead of time. I'll talk a little bit more about that process in a bit. I also worked on many digitalization projects, both in-house and with vendors, and I built our department's first dedicated analytics team. The 20 years I was at Southwest, the airline doubled in size and also became more complex with international flying and different aircraft types and many more airports. When I left, Southwest had over 700 aircraft flying in the schedule and 17,000 cabin crew, or as we call them, flight attendants. I took a buyout at the end of 2020 that was offered as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, and now I've established my own company to do consulting and mediation. It's called Resolve with Clarity. So first, I'm going to tell you about one of the biggest planning crises during my 20-year career. You might think I'm going to talk about COVID-19, and I will talk about that in a little bit, but I'm actually going to start with a crisis that began a year prior. In March of 2019, the Boeing 737 MAX aircraft was grounded after a second fatal crash. The MAX grounding was one of the largest planning crises during my career. It was about 5% of our fleet and flight schedule at that time, but it touched 20% of our crew schedules. And I'll explain why that was so impactful by briefly illustrating our scheduling process. This is an overview of the airline crewing process. These elements here in a tan color are commercial planning processes. In green are the crew planning processes. Gold are the processes that involve our pilots and flight attendants. And then blue are crew scheduling processes. So several years prior to the flight actually operating, our commercial planning teams are coming up with a fleet plan, which feeds into the crew staffing plan. So that's the hiring plan and the training plan for our crews, how many we'll hire and when we'll hire them. Then about a year prior, the network plan is created by our network planning department. And that can affect also how many crews we need to hire. About 9 months prior to a flight operating is when a flight schedule would go out for sale. So those customer bookings would happen anywhere from 9 months prior all the way up until day of operation. And that feeds back into the network planning process because the initial flight schedule that goes out for sale typically is never the flight schedule that's flown. The network planning department may monitor for changes and add flights or remove flights or change flights. But about 2 months prior to when a flight operates, crew planning starts creating what's called crew pairings. So crew pairings are a series of flight in a schedule that's intended to be flown by one crew. So it's basically building the flights into a crew schedule. And that has to happen about 2 months prior to flights being flown. And this happens on a calendar monthly basis because crews then start bidding for their schedules a month prior. And at most airlines in the US, that's awarded by seniority, but there's usually some sort of bidding process at almost every airline worldwide. So that happens about a month prior. The crews are awarded their schedules, and then they can start trading schedules. So at Southwest, trading was a big part of the flexibility that our crews enjoyed. Then closer in, so usually about a week ahead of time, there may be changes to the flight schedule, so cancellations or delays. And so crew scheduling, who's represented here in the blue color, they'll repair the schedules if there are any cancellations or delays. And then they're also responsible to cover open flying, and they may rely on crews to pick up for premium to do that. So that's kind of a general overview of that process. At Southwest, we use what's called a pairing optimizer, and most airlines will use this because they're solving a huge math problem to create optimal schedules for crews. And Southwest actually has the largest crew optimization problem in the world because it's a single fleet type, and prior to COVID, it was about 4,000 flights per day. So as I mentioned earlier, the MAX grounding happened on March 13th of 2019. So that touched 5% of our flight schedule, but 20% of our crew schedules. And that had to be fixed for the March schedule with cancellations and delays. So a massive number of cancellations were brought into our crew schedules for the remainder of the month, and that was handled by crew scheduling. But as I mentioned earlier, April was already awarded to crews by that time, so they were in the process of bidding their schedules and having those awarded. And so the schedule revisions that occurred from network planning happened much closer in than they typically would to remove those flights. So that extended into an irregular operations period all the way through April. So for a month and a half, it was a massive irregular operations that crew scheduling was having to repair. And then we had to quickly replan the May schedule because we were already in the midst of building May schedules for our crews out of the flight schedule. And so we had to quickly, once network planning revised the flight schedule, build those into crew schedules to meet our deadlines for May. And that doesn't leave much time for quality iterations, solving that large of a math problem. So in subsequent months, due to uncertainty, Southwest was still publishing flight schedules with the MAX, but then later cutting them when it became clear the return to service would not occur in time. So we had frequent meetings, frequent replanning affecting hiring decisions and other factors. On March 6th of 2020, we had a large meeting with all the groups that had been involved in that year-long MAX return to service project. We didn't know what the meeting was going to be about. It turned out to be a celebration. There were cupcakes and balloons, and our CEO was there to speak with us and give us a small gift for all of our efforts over the past year. He gave us a gift card to a local restaurant. Something else was brewing, though. I used my gift card to go to the restaurant that night, and usually it was kind of hard to get into the restaurant, but a reservation was available that night, and it seemed emptier than normal. And of course, now we all understand why. That was on March 6th of 2020. The following week, we began planning for the reduction in flying related to the COVID-19 crisis. In the US, we have a saying that hindsight is 2020. Well, we had hindsight in 2020 about not wanting to repeat that painful 2-month-long reschedule process we did for the MAX in 2019. So we developed what we called Project Hindsight. Southwest mostly built technology in-house, so we got some of the most knowledgeable and innovative technology and crew analytics and planning team members together in a meeting on Thursday, March 12th. So you can see here, this is kind of a sequence of events and a different view of where we were with the schedules when those first few weeks of the COVID-19 crisis unfolded. So 20 days later, we had developed and tested this new automated way to rebuild the schedule and repair all the schedules in one night on April 1st for the entire month. So you can see here, we were operating sort of as normal, but with some replanning kind of going on behind the scenes for that first week of the COVID crisis. And then we started having mass cancellations when we had ATC towers shut down due to COVID and different restrictions in different localities in the US. So we had massive rescheduling going on that last week and a half of April. April schedules were already being bid at that time and traded before the schedules had even been revised. And then May, we were finishing up the May schedules, but at that point we were much more worried about what we were going to do for April. And again, we were able to do sort of a mass rescheduling of the entire April schedule in one night instead of going through a whole month of rolling reschedules as we had the prior month. We made some mistakes and learned some lessons, and we had to reuse that method again for pilots in May and both pilots and cabin crew in August. But that is an example of sort of how we handled that with a digitalization effort. And one thing that's clear here is that there is volatility in workforce planning, and COVID showed that to nearly any industry. But there's always some volatility in the airline industry. As you can see here, this is air passenger market analysis from the International Air Transport Association. And we have these sort of huge peaks and valleys in the years leading up into COVID. So this is starting in 2017. So you can see these are revenue passenger kilometers. There's almost a 25% difference between the peaks and valleys in customer demand, which reflect peaks and valleys in the flight schedule. And then there's this massive drop off with COVID and sort of an increase, but a volatile up and down in the 2 years following that. And we have to figure out how to respond to that volatility in customer demand and employee availability and external factors by creating flexible commercial plans and staffing plans and even policies. Customers and employees expect this flexibility in policies because they've been dealing with the volatility over the past 2 years especially. And in complex planning processes, we need optimization. So we worked on a project with Optum, which was our network planning vendor for their flight schedule optimizer. We worked on a project to automate some processes we would go through back and forth to give feedback from crew planning into the flight planning process. And we developed a capability to build more crew-friendly schedules. It was inefficient to do that back and forth with them every time they published a schedule, because sometimes we would even request changes that may be harmful or less optimal for other work groups. So they built into their flight schedule optimizer, and now Optum is part of Amadeus. This is from a white paper that they jointly published. You may want to take a look. It has some interesting stuff in that white paper. It's on the Amadeus website. But we worked with that vendor to develop logic to create schedules requiring lower cost and staffing without affecting projected revenue. So that really has to happen earlier in the process. So modern workforce planning must incorporate the operational cost and constraints into the commercial planning process to really get an optimal solution. Otherwise, there's really just not the time, especially because, as I mentioned, with volatility and shorter time constraints to create schedules when we have all of these close-in changes, it really needs to understand the operational constraints and the staffing constraints in the commercial processes. There are still many more opportunities for this in various processes at the airline, from initial scheduling all the way through day of operations. And the third trend that I'll talk about is transparency. So with all the volatility that we see and all the complexity, we really need to be transparent with the why. So we need to be able to explain that why to customers who experience delays or cancellations, explaining the why to employees who experience schedule changes, and even explaining the why to business leaders and owners concerned about cost increases. And I think Lana talked earlier about how we really often as workforce planners don't understand the why. How can we explain the why if we as workforce planners don't understand it? And that really needs to be built into the digitalization. And in absence of information, people will come up with their own stories about why something is happening. And oftentimes that's not a positive story. So it's a competitive advantage if a company can do this well, both for customers and employees, because in these complex, volatile environments, the plans will almost always change. So in summary, we are in a rapidly changing world. Every industry, retail, food service, transportation, education, everything's changing rapidly and everything is complicated. And the future of workforce planning will require solving these complex logistical problems in a short amount of time. All of this is requiring significant investment in digitalization. So in order to handle the volatility with flexibility and these complex environments, and to do so with trust, we need a solid layer of data capture and analysis, of advanced optimization to solve these complex problems and understand the effects of decisions on the downline workforce and customers. And then we also need self-service to be able to communicate those changes and the why behind those changes and build that trust. And, just to kind of wrap up what we did during COVID, had we invested in this type of digitalization that we did in Project Hindsight soon after the max grounding, which wasn't the first replanning challenge during my career, it would have been much more effective in initial launch. So designing, testing, and executing a 6 to 9 month project in 20 days was not ideal. We made mistakes and we learned from those when we used it 2 more times in 2020. Those challenges will not stop. Investment in digitalization is necessary, and the companies who do that, the organizations who do that, will win more customers and retain more employees. So thank you so much to WePlan and WorkAxle for inviting me to give this presentation. I was able to see a demo of WePlan recently, and it seems like a really helpful product for modeling staff plans. So well done there, and I look forward to your questions.